Hello, I'm going to talk to you about democracy. Democracy is a particular model of government, and it's a model of government that is now favoured in most modern legal systems, including Australia. But although democracy is very prevalent, and you've probably heard the word a lot already before, it's actually a fairly complex and contested concept. The word democracy originated in Greece. Demos, roughly translated, means the common people, and kratos, roughly translated, means rule. So at its most basic level, democracy means rule by the people. More generally, we might describe a democratic system of government as one in which the people who make up the legal system have some say in how they are governed. Democracy might be defined as the opposite of an autocracy, which is a legal system in which one person or a small group of people govern the country as they think fit, without the consent or input of the people. Though this gives us a basic idea of what democracy is, there are many different models of democracy and different theories about why it's a good system of government and how it should work. To give you a very basic example, it's typical to describe both Australia and the United States as democratic legal systems, but you can see important differences between the two. For example, in Australia, it's compulsory to vote, but in the United States, it's not. That raises the question, which is the better means of achieving democracy? Should people be legally required to vote? Or should it be up to the people to decide whether or not they vote? There is also an important difference between direct and indirect democracy. Direct democracy means that the people have a very direct input into the way that the legal system operates. In an indirect democratic model, the people's input is more diffuse. So, for example, direct democracy might entail that people have a say on what bills are enacted as laws. That happens, for example, in some states in the United States. In a representative democracy, the people are not directly involved in government decision-making in that way. They choose who sits in government, and then the people who sit in government are expected to act on the people's behalf. Australia is a good example of a representative democratic model. We are entitled to choose who, for example, sits in the federal parliament, but we don't have a say directly in what laws the federal parliament enacts. Rather, it's up to Parliament to choose which laws to enact on our behalf. The way that we express our view about whether Parliament has done a good job or not is through the ballot box. If we don't like the laws that the Parliament has enacted, then we elect different members of Parliament at the next election. That's an example of indirect democracy at work. Most people agree that democracy is a good model of government, though it's certainly not perfect. Winston Churchill, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, famously observed, "Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried." So, why do you think democracy is the least worst system of government? Or in other words, why democracy? Democracy can be justified on instrumental or intrinsic grounds, and I'll explain what I mean by that now. The intrinsic justification of democracy is that it is inherently fairer to give the people a say in how they are governed. To put the same point differently, there's said to be something inherently unfair about subjecting people to public power when they have absolutely no say into how that public power is exercised. This view is premised upon the assumption that every person deserves to have some say into how the government is run. The way in which government is run will have a significant impact on every aspect of your life. If you have no say into how government operates, then you have no say into how many aspects of your life will run. For these reasons, many people argue that we have to have some say into how we are governed, or else we're not really free. You can also see that this is related to the assumption that all people are equal. If we say that everyone in a legal system should have some say into how the government is run, then we're assuming that everyone's view is important and valuable, that everyone should have a choice. This is very different from, for example, saying that there are certain people who are better or cleverer or for whatever reason are entitled to decide how government is run on the other's behalf. So democracy is also linked to ideas of equality and shared human rights. I've explained some of the intrinsic justifications for democracy. Democracy can also be justified on instrumental grounds. That is, it's often argued that democracy is a good system of government because it just produces good outcomes. The idea here is that if we ask a wide range of people with different expertise, opinions, and life experiences about how government should run, we're probably going to form a better view. We're going to probably find a solution that suits more people and is all round better. Once again, that kind of argument is premised on the view that everyone is worthy of contributing to government and that everyone has something valuable to say. That's very different from a legal system in which, for example, we assume that certain people are better qualified to speak for the country than others. The final intrinsic justification for democracy that is sometimes given is that it creates better citizens. The argument here is that by calling on the people to get involved in the way that government is run, we encourage civic participation, community building, and critical thought on important public issues. If the people are called upon to vote, they might be encouraged to think seriously about how the government should operate and what laws should be made. They might be encouraged to expand their knowledge or talk things over with their fellow citizens. All these things can help to create rational and empathetic citizens, as well as a vibrant civic culture. But of course, that might be a little idealistic, and all of these potential benefits of the democratic system depend on a great deal on the particular features of the society in question and the specificities of the democratic process. Any number of factors might cause people to become disengaged from the political process, even though they're routinely called upon to vote. Here, you might want to consider whether that point of difference that I raised earlier is going to affect the quality of the democratic system. That is it better to legally require people to vote, or should we give them the choice about whether they or not they want to vote? The arguments in favour of democracy are very powerful ones. They speak to very deep-seated ideas about individual liberty and about what government is. However, they are not unproblematic, and I'm now going to talk to you about some of the complexities or problems of the democratic system. Many modern democracies, such as Australia, are large and complex societies. The people who make up our society are all very different. They have different views, different values, different beliefs about how the government should be run. In a large and complex society such as this, it is sometimes difficult to find solutions to public problems that please everyone. People are going to have different views about what the law should be, about how government should act. In circumstances such as this, it may only be possible to find the solution that pleases the majority of people. And some people say that that's perfectly fair. That in a system where people disagree, we should strive to find the solution that pleases the majority. We might be willing to accept that solution as the best and fairest one, especially if we know that everyone has had the chance to contribute and have their say through the electoral process. But some people argue that we should not be willing to accept solutions that merely please the majority. After all, that means necessarily that some people are going to be left living in a system that runs in a way that they don't agree with. More problematically, there might be certain groups within society who always end up getting shortchanged. That is, who never get their views reflected in law. If there are minority groups who are socially, economically, or otherwise disadvantaged, then they may struggle to get their point of view across. The candidates that minority groups support may never get elected to Parliament. The policies that serve minority interests may never get enacted as laws because the majority disagree with them or don't think that they are important. Indeed, the democratic process may ultimately lead to the enactment of laws that positively diminish the rights of minority groups if it serves the majority. In other words, due to social, historical, and economical factors, there may be certain groups within society who never get a fair go within the democratic system. This basic problem is sometimes called the tyranny of the majority, and it's one of the greatest problems facing the democratic system. Keep this in mind when we talk about the structure of Parliament and how the Houses of Parliament are elected later in this course, and whether you think that does anything to mitigate the problem of the tyranny of the majority. The final potential problem with a democratic system is that it typically has to be compromised in practice. Democracy is premised on the view that everyone should be entitled to have a say in how the country is governed. That entails that everyone should have the right to vote as to who, for example, sits in Parliament, and indeed that everyone should have the option to run to sit in Parliament if they should choose. But in practice, both of those rights are typically compromised. That is, there are usually restrictions on who can vote. One of the most common and perhaps least controversial examples of this is that children can't vote. In Australia, you can only vote if you're aged 18 or more. But there are other restrictions on the right to vote that are far more controversial. For example, in Australia, there are now restrictions on the ability of prisoners to vote if they have been convicted of certain crimes. And you can think about whether that is legitimate. Do you think that someone should be denied the right to vote because they've been convicted of a crime? The final point to make is that there are legal constraints on who can run for Parliament, and these are set out in statute law and in the Constitution. We'll look at those restrictions when we look at Parliament in more detail later in this course. So I've talked to you about what democracy means, some of the reasons why we think it's the least worst system of government, and also some of its problems. We're going to discuss these ideas further in class.